She couldn't stand up. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, her hand trembling against the polished mahogany, her face twisted with something that looked like triumph but smelled like fear. The whole family was there. Thanksgiving. 43 people crammed into her dining room, and she picked that moment to announce it. "Your grandson is not worthy of my estate. He's just a liability." She said it loud enough that the conversation at the other end of the table stopped. My Aunt Patricia froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. My cousin Daniel actually turned around in his chair to stare. And my son, 11 years old, sitting 2 seats down from me, went very still. He didn't cry. He sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, while every adult in that room pretended they hadn't heard what they'd just heard. My mother reached for the cranberry sauce like it was the most important thing in the world. My uncle cleared his throat and asked someone to pass the rolls. I pulled an envelope from my pocket. Cream-colored, heavy stock, dated 20 years ago. "Actually," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt, "his grandmother set aside something for him a long time ago, before any of you knew what you were looking at." That's when she tried to stand up. Couldn't do it. Her legs wouldn't hold her. "Some people in my family still think I went too far. I need you to tell me." Let me tell you how we got here. The light in my grandmother's dining room was the kind of light that makes everything look like it costs more than it does. Cream walls, crystal chandelier, November sun coming through windows that faced a garden someone else maintained. My son had his hands flat on the table, palms down, the way I'd taught him to do when he needed to ground himself. He wasn't looking at anyone, just at his hands. I wasn't angry yet. That's the thing people don't understand. I was calm. I'd been ready for this exact moment for 7 months. I had the envelope in my jacket pocket. I had my attorney's number in my phone. I had a folder in my car with documents my grandmother didn't know existed. My grandmother was still trying to stand. My uncle moved to help her, but she waved him off, her hand cutting through the air like she was swatting something away. She managed to get upright, gripping the edge of the table, and she looked at me with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. Disappointment, like I was a project that hadn't worked out. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said. I smiled, didn't say anything, just held the envelope where she could see it. That's when I knew I had her. My family has always been the kind of family that mistakes money for character. My grandmother built a commercial real estate portfolio in the 70s and 80s that's worth somewhere between $8 and $12 million now, depending on the market. She likes to say she did it alone, which is true if you don't count the accountants, the lawyers, the property managers, and my grandfather, who died when I was 6 and apparently never did anything worth mentioning. She raised 3 children. My mother is the oldest. Compliant. Careful. Married a man who works in insurance and has never once in his life done something that surprised anyone. They live in a house my grandmother helped them buy, drive cars my grandmother helped them lease, and send their kids to schools my grandmother has opinions about. My Uncle Richard is the middle child. He runs one of my grandmother's properties and calls it his career. His wife hosts book clubs and fundraisers and has a way of tilting her head when she talks to you that makes you feel like you're being interviewed for a position you didn't apply for. My Aunt Patricia is the youngest and the only one who got out. She married a surgeon, moved to Boston, and calls twice a year. My grandmother pretends not to care, but she mentions Patricia's name at least once every family dinner, usually in a sentence that starts with "at least someone." I'm my mother's only child. I was supposed to be the redemption arc. The grandchild who made up for my mother's lack of ambition. The one who would make my grandmother look good at the country club. I got pregnant at 19, not married, no plan. The father was a guy I'd been dating for 4 months who very calmly explained that he wasn't ready to be a parent and I should do whatever I thought was best. I never saw him again. My grandmother sat me down in her living room and told me I was throwing my life away. My mother cried. My Uncle Richard suggested adoption in a tone that made it clear he thought it was the only reasonable option. My Aunt Patricia called from Boston and said, "Do what you need to do, but don't expect them to make it easy." I kept my son. I named him Julian. I finished college online while working at a call center that paid $11 an hour. My grandmother did not offer to help. My mother brought over groceries once a month and always mentioned how hard it must be. When Julian was 2, I got a job at a marketing firm. Entry level, $33,000 a year. I was good at it. Not just competent, good. I understood the way people made decisions. I could write copy that made someone feel like they'd been seen. I got promoted twice in 18 months. My grandmother asked me once at a family dinner if I was still working at that little company. I said yes. She said, "Well, it's good that you have something." I had something. I had a salary of $68,000, a portfolio of clients who requested me by name, and a reputation in my industry that was starting to mean something. But my family didn't ask about that. They asked if I was seeing anyone. They asked if Julian was doing okay in school. They asked if I needed anything, in a tone that suggested they already knew the answer. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, my Uncle Richard told me I should think about going back to school for something more stable. He said marketing was trendy and I should consider accounting or HR. I just signed a contract to lead a campaign for a financial services client. 6 figures. My first. I smiled and said I'd think about it. That Christmas, my cousin Daniel announced he was getting his MBA. My grandmother stood up and made a toast. She said Daniel was the kind of young man who understood the value of planning for the future. She said she was proud to have someone in the family who took initiative. Daniel had failed out of 2 different colleges and was only getting his MBA because my grandmother was paying for it. But I didn't say that. I raised my glass. I smiled. I called my attorney the next morning. Julian was 8 the first time my grandmother said something cruel directly to him. We were at her house for Easter. He was in the living room with the other kids, playing some game on the floor, and my grandmother walked by and said, "You should be outside. You're getting soft." He looked up at her, confused. He was 8. He didn't understand what she meant. She kept walking. I found him 20 minutes later sitting on the back steps by himself. He wasn't crying, but his face had that look kids get when they're trying to figure out if they did something wrong. I sat down next to him. I didn't say anything. I just sat there. After a while, he said, "Am I soft?" I said, "No, you're exactly who you're supposed to be." He nodded, didn't look at me, just nodded. I went home that night and opened my laptop. I had been building something quietly for 2 years, a consulting business, high-end clients. Corporate strategy work that paid 4 and 5 times what my salary had been. I was good at it, better than good. I was the person companies called when they needed someone who could see 3 moves ahead. My family didn't know. I never told them. I let them think I was still at the marketing firm, still making whatever they imagined someone like me made. I let my mother worry about me. I let my uncle offer advice. I let my grandmother look at me with that expression that said she'd expected more. I built a business that cleared $900,000 the year Julian turned 9. I built it while working full-time. I built it while raising my son alone. I built it in the hours after he went to bed and the hours before he woke up. My grandmother had no idea. The next year, Julian was 9, and my cousin Daniel got engaged. My grandmother hosted a party. She gave a speech about legacy and family and the importance of choosing the right partner. She looked at me twice during that speech. Both times her expression said everything she didn't. I was 34, unmarried, single mother, working at that little company. I smiled. I congratulated Daniel. I went home and signed a contract with a client in Singapore, $1.4 million over 2 years. I didn't correct her. But I opened my laptop that night and drafted the strategy that would become the foundation for everything that came next. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you already know what that silence feels like. Julian turned 10 and my grandmother started talking about her will. Not directly, never directly, but at family dinners she'd mention updates, changes, considerations. She'd look around the table and talk about responsibility and worthiness and the importance of making sure her legacy went to people who would honor it. My mother would nod. My uncle would agree. My cousin Daniel would look appropriately serious. I'd pass the potatoes. My grandmother told me once at a dinner where Julian wasn't there that she worried about him. She said he didn't have a strong male influence. She said boys needed structure and discipline, and she wasn't sure I understood that. I was sitting across from her. I had just closed a deal that would net me $470,000. I had a team of 6 people working for me. I had clients on 3 continents. I said, "I'm doing my best." She patted my hand. She said, "I know you are, sweetheart." I smiled. I went home. I called my financial advisor and moved $200,000 into a trust fund for Julian that my family would never know about until I decided they should. That's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you room to move. Julian turned 11 in March. My grandmother didn't come to his birthday party. She sent a card with $50 in it and a note that said, "Buy something practical." He bought a book about astronomy. Been obsessed with space since he was 7. He read it cover to cover in 2 days. My grandmother asked me a month later what he'd bought. I told her. She said, "Well, that's not very practical, is it?" I said. He liked it. She said, that's the problem. I didn't respond. I had a meeting with my attorney scheduled for the following week. I had documents to review. I had a plan that had been in motion for 3 years and was almost complete. I let her think whatever she wanted to think. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I had everything in place. The trust, the documents, the evidence. My attorney had gone through every piece of it twice. We were ready. I knew my grandmother was planning something. My mother had mentioned it in passing 2 weeks before, something about updates to the estate plan, something about making sure everything was clear. I smiled when my mother told me. I said that sounded reasonable. I didn't tell her I already knew. I didn't tell her I'd been preparing for this exact scenario since Julian was 8 years old and my grandmother had looked at him like he was something she needed to correct. I packed the envelope in my jacket pocket the morning of Thanksgiving. Cream-colored, heavy stock, dated 20 years ago. I'd had it for 7 months. I'd been waiting for the right moment. The right moment turned out to be when my grandmother decided to humiliate my son in front of 43 people. She couldn't stand up. Everything I had built was about to be tested in front of 43 people who had absolutely no idea it existed. I started building the business the year Julian turned 6. Not because I had a plan to humiliate my family someday, because I needed to prove to myself that I could do something they'd never expect. The marketing firm I worked for had good clients but terrible margins. I saw the proposals we sent out. I saw what we charged and what we delivered. I knew I could do it better. So I started taking on side projects, corporate strategy consulting, brand positioning for companies that were scaling fast and needed someone who could think 3 steps ahead. I called it Meridian Strategy Group, registered it as an LLC, kept it quiet. The first year, I made $72,000 on top of my salary. The second year, $216,000. By the time Julian was 8, I'd cleared $500,000 in a single year, and I still showed up to my day job like nothing had changed. I kept it private because I didn't want my family's opinions. I didn't want my grandmother offering to help or my uncle suggesting I think smaller. I wanted to build something that was entirely mine. My attorney's name is Patricia Reyes. I hired her when Julian was 7, right after my grandmother made that comment about him getting soft. Patricia is the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste words. She listens, takes notes, and then tells you exactly what your options are. I told her I wanted to set up a trust for Julian, something my family couldn't touch, something that would be there no matter what my grandmother decided to do with her estate. Patricia nodded. How much are we talking about? Whatever I can put in it. She drew up the documents. I funded it with $300,000 that first year. By the time Julian turned 10, the trust had $1.6 million in it. My family had no idea. The first close call happened at Christmas when Julian was 9. My Uncle Richard asked me how work was going. Standard question. He always asked it in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. It's good, I said. Busy. Still at the marketing firm? Yeah. My mother leaned in from across the room. You should ask about benefits. Make sure you're getting what you deserve. I was sitting at the dining room table. My laptop was in my car with a contract I'd signed 2 days earlier. $470,000. A tech company in Austin that needed a complete rebrand before their funding round. I'll look into it, I promised. My grandmother was watching me. She had this way of looking at you like she was waiting for you to confirm something she already suspected. You know, she started, and I knew where this was going. If you ever need help, you just have to ask. I know, thank you. I worry about you. Raising Julian alone, it can't be easy. It wasn't easy, but not for the reasons she thought. We're doing fine, I told her. She smiled, patted my hand. Of course you are. I went home that night and transferred another $50,000 into Julian's trust. The second close call was worse. Julian was 10. My cousin Daniel was at my grandmother's house talking about his new job. He'd finished his MBA and gotten hired at a consulting firm. My grandmother kept saying how proud she was, how smart he was to invest in his education. Daniel looked at me. You ever think about going back to school? An MBA could really open doors. I had clients in 7 countries. I had a team of 4 people working under me. I had just turned down a project because the timeline didn't work and the client had offered to double the fee to make me reconsider. Maybe someday, I said. My aunt leaned forward. What do you even do at that company? Marketing is so broad. Strategy work mostly. Helping clients figure out positioning. That sounds interesting. Her tone suggested it didn't. My grandmother was watching again. Well, as long as you're happy. I wasn't aiming for happy, I was aiming for something else entirely. I am, I said. Daniel started talking about his salary. $78,000 a year. My grandmother called it impressive. My mother said she was glad someone in the family was doing well. I excused myself to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror and reminded myself that this was strategic. Every dismissive comment was data. Every assumption they made gave me more room to maneuver. I called Patricia the next day. I want to make sure everything is ironclad, I told her. If my grandmother tries to cut Julian out of her will, I want him protected. He's already protected. The trust is separate from her estate. I know, but I want more than that. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Are you thinking? I'm thinking she's going to do something public, something meant to humiliate him, and when she does, I want to be ready. Ready how? I told her about the envelope. The one my grandmother had given me 20 years ago when I was pregnant and she was still pretending to be supportive. She'd set aside a small amount for Julian, $5,000. A token gesture she probably forgot about the day after she signed the papers. I'd kept the envelope. Never mentioned it. Never opened it. Patricia understood immediately. You want to use that? I want to show her that she set something aside for him before she decided he wasn't worth her time. I want her to see what she's become. That's going to hurt. Good. Patricia drew up additional documents, a full accounting of the trust, proof of funding, timeline of deposits, everything organized and ready to present if I needed to. The third close call happened 6 months before Thanksgiving. My grandmother invited me to lunch, just the two of us. That never happened. We met at a restaurant she liked, white tablecloths, wine list thicker than the menu. She ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. I wanted to talk to you about the estate, she said. My heart kicked up, but I kept my face neutral. Okay. I'm making some updates, making sure everything is clear, you understand. Of course. She looked at me carefully. I need to know you're being realistic about your situation. What situation? Julian, raising him alone. The challenges that come with that. I took a sip of water, didn't respond. I want to make sure he's taken care of, she continued, but I also need to think about what's fair. Daniel is building a career, contributing to the family legacy. I have to consider that. She was telling me she was cutting Julian out or reducing his share or putting conditions on it. She was telling me without saying it directly. That's your decision, I said. She looked surprised, like she'd expected me to argue. I just want you to understand, she added. It's not personal. It was entirely personal, but I didn't say that. I understand, I told her. We finished lunch. She paid. She hugged me in the parking lot and told me she loved me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes after she drove away. Then I called Patricia. She's doing it. You sure? She basically told me she's going to cut him out or reduce his share. She'll frame it as being fair. Patricia exhaled slowly. What do you want to do? I want to wait. Let her make the announcement however she's planning to make it. And then I want to show her exactly what she's underestimated. You're sure about this? I thought about Julian. The way he'd looked sitting on those back steps when he was 8. The way my grandmother looked at him like he was a problem to be managed. I'm sure. Patricia started preparing everything. We went through the documents 3 times, made sure every number was accurate. Every date was right. Every piece of evidence was exactly what we needed it to be. My financial advisor's name is Marcus Chen. He'd been managing my accounts since the business crossed $500,000 in revenue. He called me in October. You know you don't have to prove anything to them, he said. This isn't about proving anything. Then what is it about? I didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe I did and I didn't want to say it out loud. It's about making sure Julian knows he's worth more than their judgment. Marcus was quiet. Then, the trust is at $2.3 million now. Marcus been good to us. He's going to be fine no matter what she does. I know. So this is about you. Maybe it was. Maybe I needed to see my grandmother's face when she realized she'd spent 11 years underestimating both of us. Maybe I needed my family to understand that their assumptions had been wrong from the start. She's going to make an announcement, I told Marcus, probably at Thanksgiving, and I'm going to let her. And then I'm going to show her the envelope she gave me 20 years ago, the one where she set aside money for Julian before she decided he wasn't worth her estate. I'm going to remind her who she used to be. Marcus didn't argue. He knew me well enough to know I'd already decided. The weeks before Thanksgiving felt like standing at the top of a very tall building. I knew what was coming. I knew what I was going to do. I just had to wait for the moment. Julian asked me once if Grandma liked him. We were in the car. He was looking out the window. Of course she does, I lied. She doesn't act like it. I didn't know what to say to that. He was 11. He was old enough to see the truth. Some people have a hard time showing how they feel, I tried. He nodded. didn't look convinced. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. Don't let anyone make you feel different. He squeezed back. That night I checked the trust balance again, 2.4 million. I checked the documents Patricia had prepared. I checked the envelope, still cream-colored, still sealed, dated 20 years ago when my grandmother still thought I might turn into someone she could be proud of. Everything was ready. Thanksgiving morning, I put the envelope in my jacket pocket. Julian asked why I was wearing a jacket to dinner. Just in case, I said. We drove to my grandmother's house, 43 people, the whole family, everyone talking and laughing and pretending we were the kind of family that enjoyed being together. My grandmother was at the head of the table. She looked at me once when we walked in. Something in her expression told me today was the day. I sat down, put my jacket on the back of my chair, felt the envelope in the pocket. Julian sat next to me, quiet, nervous. He knew something was happening. Kids always know. My grandmother stood up halfway through dinner, tapped her glass. Everyone stopped talking. I want to talk about the future, she announced. My mother looked excited. My uncle looked attentive. My cousin Daniel looked smug. I felt the envelope through my jacket pocket. My grandmother looked directly at Julian. Your grandson is not worthy of my estate. He's just a liability. The room didn't go silent. It went something worse. It went careful. Everyone suddenly very interested in their plates. Julian's hands went flat on the table. He was trying not to cry. I pulled the envelope from my pocket. My grandmother tried to stand up. She couldn't do it. Her legs wouldn't hold her, and everything I had built in 11 years of silence was about to land in the middle of her dining room like a bomb she'd handed me herself. I want to know if you would have said what I said next, because I still think about it. My grandmother was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles bloodless, and she was staring at the envelope in my hand like it was something that had crawled out of a grave she'd forgotten about. What is that? Her voice was sharp. I didn't answer. I set the envelope on the table in front of me, cream-colored, heavy stock, her handwriting on the front, for Julian when he is old enough. My mother leaned forward. What's going on? My Uncle Richard looked between me and my grandmother like he was trying to figure out whose side he was supposed to be on. Julian's hands were still flat on the table. He was looking at me now, confused, scared, 11 years old and wondering why his mother had just pulled out an envelope at the exact moment his grandmother had called him a liability in front of everyone he knew. I looked at my grandmother. You gave this to me 20 years ago, March 15th, 2005. I was 6 months pregnant. You sat me down in your living room and told me you wanted to make sure Julian had something, no matter what happened. She blinked. I could see her trying to remember. She'd signed a lot of documents in her life. This one hadn't mattered to her. That was a long time ago, she managed. It was. You put $5,000 aside for him. Your words were, every child deserves a foundation. My Aunt Patricia, the one from Boston, was watching me carefully now. She was the only one at the table who looked like she understood what was happening. My grandmother straightened, tried to. That was before what? I kept my voice level. Calm. Before you decided he wasn't worthy, before you decided he was just a liability. My cousin Daniel shifted in his seat. This isn't really the time. No, this is exactly the time. I looked at him. You've been sitting here for an hour listening to her talk about legacy and worthiness and who deserves what. I think we should talk about what that actually means. My mother's voice came out small. Sweetheart, maybe we should. Mom, I didn't raise my voice. I need you to be quiet. She flinched. My mother had never heard me say something like that before. None of them had. I turned back to my grandmother. You set aside $5,000 for Julian before he was born. You told me every child deserves a foundation. And then you spent the next 11 years treating him like he was a mistake that needed to be corrected. That's not fair. My grandmother's voice was getting stronger. She was finding her footing. I have always wanted what's best for that boy, but wanting something and being realistic are two different things. Realistic about what? About his circumstances, about what he's going to face in this world without a father, without the kind of structure a young man needs. Julian made a small sound. Not quite a word, just a breath. I reached across and took his hand. He grabbed it like he was drowning. He has everything he needs, I told her. My Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Look, I think we're all just trying to do what's right for the family. Are you? I looked at him. Is that what you're doing? He looked away. My grandmother was watching me now with an expression I'd seen before. The one that said she was reassessing, recalculating, trying to figure out what I knew that she didn't. What do you want? She asked. I want you to understand what you just did. I made a decision about my estate, that's my right. It is, absolutely, but you didn't just make a decision, you announced it. At Thanksgiving, in front of 43 people, you told an 11-year-old boy that he's not worthy, that he's a liability. I didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant every word. You've been planning this for months, maybe longer. You had lunch with me 6 months ago and told me you were making updates. You wanted me to know it was coming. You wanted me to prepare him. My mother was staring at me. You knew. Of course I knew. My grandmother's expression shifted. Something calculating moved behind her eyes. If you knew, then why didn't you say something? Why wait until now? Because I wanted to see if you'd actually do it. The table had gotten very still. My cousin Daniel's wife was looking at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. My uncle's wife had her hand on his arm, holding him in place. My Aunt Patricia from Boston was leaning back in her chair, arms crossed, watching me like I was the most interesting thing she'd seen in years. I opened the envelope, pulled out the document inside. 20 years old. My grandmother's signature at the bottom. A trust agreement for $5,000 established for Julian before he was born. I slid it across the table to her. She looked at it. Her face did something complicated. You kept this, she said. I did. Why? Because I wanted to remember who you were before you decided my son wasn't good enough for you. My mother made a small noise. My grandmother looked at her, then back at me. This doesn't change anything, my grandmother said quietly. $5,000 20 years ago doesn't make him ready for the kind of responsibility I'm talking about. You're right. It doesn't, she looked surprised. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the file I'd saved there, the one Patricia had sent me that morning, a complete accounting of Julian's trust fund. But $2.4 million does. The room didn't go silent, it went something else. Like all the air had been pulled out through a hole no one could see, my grandmother stared at me. What did you say? Julian has a trust fund, $2.4 million. I've been funding it since he was 6 years old. It's completely separate from your estate. He doesn't need your money, he never did. My cousin Daniel leaned forward. That's not possible. I looked at him. Why not? Because you work at a marketing firm, you don't have that kind of money. I worked at a marketing firm, past tense, I left 3 years ago. My mother's voice cracked. You left. I started my own consulting business when Julian was 6. Corporate strategy. I have clients in 9 countries. Last year I cleared $1.8 million in revenue. This year I'm on track for 2.3. My Uncle Richard was shaking his head. No, that's not, we would have known. Why would you have known? Did you ever ask what I actually did for work? Did anyone at this table ever ask me a single specific question about my career? No one answered. You asked if I was still at that little company. You told me I should get an MBA. You offered to help me with my budget. But you never asked what I was building. You just assumed I was struggling. My grandmother's hands were flat on the table now. You lied to us. I didn't lie, I just didn't correct your assumptions. That's the same thing. Is it? Because you assumed I was barely getting by. You assumed Julian needed your estate to have any kind of future. You built an entire narrative about what my life looked like, and you never once checked if it was true. My Aunt Patricia from Boston spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, amused. How much did you say the trust has? 2.4 million, she smiled. Good for you. My grandmother looked at her. This isn't funny, Patricia. I didn't say it was funny, I said good for her. She built something on her own while you were busy feeling sorry for her. My mother was crying now, not loud, just tears running down her face while she tried to hold very still. I felt something in my chest loosen, not regret, just acknowledgement. This was going to hurt her. It already was. My grandmother's voice came out harder. Fine, you have money. That doesn't change the fact that Julian needs more than a bank account. He needs guidance, structure, things you can't provide on your own. You're right, I can't provide everything on my own. That's why I have a team. Julian has a financial advisor, a trust attorney, a college planning consultant. He has mentors in 3 different fields he's interested in. He has everything he needs. Except a father. There it was. The thing she'd been wanting to say for 11 years. Julian's hand tightened on mine. I looked at my grandmother across the table. She looked smaller suddenly. Older. He has me, I said, and that's been enough. My Uncle Richard tried again. Look, I think this is a lot of information. Maybe we should take a break. Talk about this later when everyone's had time to. No, my grandmother's voice cut through. I want to know why. If you had this much money, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? If you're still here, hit like. I need to know you saw that. Because I wasn't struggling, I was building. And every time I came to a family dinner and you told me to be realistic, or Daniel suggested I go back to school, or you looked at my son like he was a problem that needed fixing, it reminded me why I was doing it. So this was about revenge. No, this was about making sure Julian knew his worth wasn't determined by your opinion. I didn't do this to hurt you, I did this to protect him. My grandmother leaned back in her chair. She looked tired. You've made your point. Have I? Because you stood up 10 minutes ago and told 43 people that my son is not worthy of your estate. You called him a liability. You did that on purpose. You wanted it to hurt. I wanted him to understand. Understand what? That he doesn't measure up, that he's not good enough. He's 11 years old. What exactly did you want him to understand? She didn't answer. My mother wiped her face. Did you really clear 1.8 million last year? Yes. And you didn't tell me? No. Why not? I looked at her, my mother, who had brought me groceries once a month and always mentioned how hard things must be, who had worried about me out loud at every family gathering, who had never once asked if I actually needed help or just assumed I did. Because you would have told her. I nodded toward my grandmother, and she would have tried to manage it, or give me advice, or make it about what she thought I should do, and I needed it to be mine. My cousin Daniel was staring at his plate. His wife had her hand on his arm now, holding him the way you hold someone who's just realized something unpleasant about themselves. My Uncle Richard tried one more time. I think we all just want what's best for Julian. Do you? Because I've been listening to you talk for years about what Julian needs, and not once has anyone asked Julian what he wants. I looked at my son. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What do you want? I asked him. He looked around the table at his grandmother, his uncle, his cousins, all these people who had opinions about his life. His voice came out steady. I want to go home. I stood up. Then let's go home. My grandmother's voice stopped me. Wait. I turned back. She was looking at the envelope on the table. The one from 20 years ago, the one that said she'd cared once before she'd decided caring was the same as controlling. I wasn't trying to hurt him, she said quietly. Then what were you trying to do? I was trying to make sure he understood what the world is like, what he's going to face. I wanted him to be ready. Ready for what? For people to underestimate him, to tell him he's not good enough, to announce in front of everyone he knows that he's a liability. I picked up my jacket. He's already ready for that because you've been teaching him that lesson his whole life. My Aunt Patricia from Boston spoke again. You should have told her sooner. I looked at her. She gestured at my grandmother. About the business, the money, you should have told her years ago. Watching her figure it out like this, that's cruel. Is it more cruel than spending 11 years making my son feel like he's not worthy of basic dignity? Patricia considered that. No, I suppose not. My grandmother was staring at the trust document. $5,000, that's what I thought he needed. It was more than the money, it was the idea behind it. Every child deserves a foundation. You said that, you meant it, and then you forgot. I didn't forget. Then what happened? She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. You made choices I didn't agree with, and I thought if I pushed hard enough you'd see that, make different ones. I made the only choices I could make. And they turned out fine. They turned out better than fine. This from my Aunt Patricia. She cleared 1.8 million last year, running her own business, raising her son. You should be proud of her. My grandmother's face did something complicated. I am proud of her. Then maybe you should have said that instead of calling her son a liability. The table had gotten quiet again. My Uncle Richard was looking at his hands. My mother was still crying. My cousin Daniel's wife had let go of his arm and was staring at nothing in particular. I felt Julian tug on my hand. He wanted to leave. I have one more thing to say, I told my grandmother. She waited. The trust is in Julian's name. He can't access it until he's 25, but when he does, he'll have a foundation. A real one, not $5,000, not your estate. Something I built for him because I knew he deserved better than waiting for people to decide if he was worthy. I pulled Julian toward the door. My grandmother's voice followed us. I want to make this right. I stopped, didn't turn around. I don't know if you can, I said. We were almost to the door when my mother's voice stopped us. Wait, please. I turned. She was standing now, her napkin clutched in one hand. I need to understand something, she said. If you had all this money, why did you let me bring you groceries? Why did you let me worry? Julian's hand was still in mine. He was looking at his grandmother, who had finally managed to stand up and was gripping the back of her chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Because you wanted to help, I told my mother. And I let you. That wasn't about money. That was about you being my mom. But you didn't need it. I needed you, that's different. My grandmother's voice cut through. How long have you been planning this? I looked at her, really looked at her. She was 78 years old. She'd built an empire. She'd raised 3 children. She'd spent decades making sure everyone knew she was the one in control. And right now, she looked like someone who just realized she'd been playing a game where the rules had changed without her noticing. I wasn't planning anything, I said. I was just protecting my son. By lying? I didn't lie, I let you assume. There's a difference. My Uncle Richard stood up. I think what Mom is trying to say is that this feels like a betrayal. We're family. We should have known what was really going on. Should you? Because I tried to tell you, not directly, but I tried. I told you I was doing well. I told you work was good. But every time I said something positive, someone at this table found a way to minimize it or redirect it or tell me what I should be doing instead. My cousin Daniel finally spoke. His voice was tight. So what, you just let us all think you were struggling? You let Grandma worry about you. You let all of us think we were better off than you. I didn't let you think anything. You thought what you wanted to think. And yes, it was easier to let you believe it than to fight you on it every single time. My grandmother moved around the table, slowly. She was still gripping furniture as she went, but she was coming toward me. Show me, she demanded. Show you what? Proof, documents, whatever you have that proves this trust exists. I pulled my phone back out, opened my email. Found the message from Patricia that morning, trust summary, complete accounting, every deposit I'd made over the last 5 years. I handed her the phone. She looked at it for a long time, scrolling, reading, her face getting tighter and tighter. 2.4 million, she said finally. Yes, you did this yourself. Yes, no one helped you. I hired professionals, but I funded it every dollar. She handed the phone back. Her hand was shaking. I don't believe you. My Aunt Patricia from Boston laughed. Actually laughed. Of course you don't, because if you believe her, you have to accept that you've been wrong about her for 11 years. My grandmother turned on her. Stay out of this, Patricia. No, I've stayed out of it for too long. We all have. We've sat here and watched you treat her like a charity case. Watched you pat her hand and tell her you're proud she's trying. Watched you look at Julian like he's damaged goods. And we didn't say anything because it was easier not to. My Uncle Richard made a noise. That's not fair. It's completely fair. When was the last time anyone at this table asked her a real question about her life? Not a polite question, a real one. When was the last time anyone treated her like she might actually know what she's doing? No one answered. My grandmother's voice came out smaller. I wanted what was best for her. No, Patricia countered. You wanted her to do what you thought was best. That's different. I could see my grandmother processing this, working through it, trying to find a way to make it not true. She looked at me. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you. Then why tell me this now? Why not just let me make the announcement and move on? Because Julian deserved to see you realize what you were doing. He deserved to watch you understand that your judgment doesn't define him. Julian squeezed my hand. When I looked down at him, he was crying. Not scared crying, something else. Relief maybe, or validation. My grandmother saw it too, her face crumpled slightly. I never meant to hurt him. But you did. You've been hurting him for years. And I let it happen because I thought if I was patient enough, if I built enough, if I proved myself enough, you'd eventually see him the way I do. How do you see him? I put my hand on Julian's shoulder. Perfect exactly as he is. My grandmother's eyes filled. She looked at Julian. I'm sorry. He didn't say anything, just held tighter to my hand. She looked back at me. What happens now? Now we leave, and you decide what kind of grandmother you want to be, but you don't get to make decisions about his future anymore. That's done. I'm still his grandmother. You are, and if you want a relationship with him, you're going to have to earn it, just like everyone else. My mother was crying harder now. This is my fault. I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. Yes, I agreed, you should have. She flinched like I'd hit her. But you can start now, I added. If you want. She nodded, wiping her face. Looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time, my grandmother sank into the nearest chair. I built everything I have. I thought I was teaching you how to be strong. You were teaching me how to survive your judgment. I learned, but Julian doesn't need those lessons. I turned toward the door again. This time no one stopped us. We were halfway to the car when I heard footsteps behind us. My Aunt Patricia. Hey, she called. I stopped. She caught up to us, slightly out of breath. I just wanted to say that was the most satisfying thing I've seen in 20 years. I smiled despite myself. Yeah, God, yes. Do you know how long I've wanted to tell her she doesn't know everything, but I moved to Boston instead. She looked at Julian. You okay, kid? He nodded. Good. You've got a hell of a mom. We got in the car. Julian put his seatbelt on and stared straight ahead. Are we ever going back there? He asked. I don't know, maybe, if things change. What if they don't change? Then we don't go back. He thought about that. I'm okay with that. I started the car. My hands had stopped shaking. I had been holding my breath since we walked into that house. I let it out slowly. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Reyes, my attorney. Everything filed. The trust documentation is complete and registered. He's protected no matter what happens with her estate. I showed Julian the message. He read it twice. So I'm really okay? You were always okay, but yes. Legally, financially, completely you're okay. He leaned back in his seat. Good. We drove home in silence, not the heavy kind. The settled kind. 3 weeks later, my grandmother called. I let it go to voicemail. She said she wanted to talk. She said she'd been thinking. She said she hoped we could find a way forward. I didn't call her back. Not yet. My mother called 2 days after that. We talked for 40 minutes. She cried. I didn't. She asked questions she should have asked years ago. I answered them. At the end, she said she was proud of me. I told her thank you. Julian turned 12 in March. We had a small party, just a few of his friends. My mother came. My Aunt Patricia flew in from Boston. My grandmother sent a card with a check for $500. Julian looked at the check for a long time. Then he handed it to me. Can we donate this? To what? I don't know, something that helps kids. We donated it to a mentorship program for children in single-parent homes. My business cleared $2.6 million that year. I hired 3 more people, opened an office. Julian came with me sometimes after school and did his homework in the conference room. He's 13 now. He wants to study astrophysics. He has a telescope he saved up for himself and a notebook full of calculations I don't understand. My grandmother asked to see him last month. I told her I'd ask him. He said maybe. Not yet, but maybe. I told her that. She said she understood. I do not hate my grandmother, but I do not need her approval anymore. Neither does Julian. We are building our own foundation, and it is strong enough. So did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.